So here we are at Geoff Patenaude's house near Horsefly. This is Maurice Guibard from the Société Historique Francophone de la Colombie-Britannique, and we're on August 13th, 2019. Thank you very much. It's our second meeting.
You're welcome.
And I'm wondering, you're good with family history. So tell me where your family is from.
From my recollection of what I was told, my great-grandfather and grandfather and two of the other brothers came from Lachute, Quebec to British Columbia, and where they were before that is beyond me. But I do know one thing, that one of the brothers was born in Nova Scotia. And the first fella that came out to British Columbia to kind of discover the rest of Canada was my grandfather, Albert Joseph Patenaude. And he came out, and I always kind of like to joke about it, but I say he came out and he liked BC so much, he emailed his grandfather, or his dad and his brothers, and said, come out to BC. And they followed suit over the next while, and I'm not sure how long it took them all to come out.
So we're talking about what, the 1880s?
No, early 1890s.
Early 90s.
Yeah.
And what did they do once they got here?
Well, they were all basically self-employed. I'm not really sure what they did in Quebec, but obviously they must have made a living somehow. But my grandfather was only 17 years old when he made the first run to British Columbia. And so when he sent word back that it was good, they all came. So the eldest would have been Ernest, and I'm not sure how much older. He was considerably older than my grandfather. And the youngest was Hope. And he was quite a bit younger than my grandfather. And how old my great-grandfather was, I cannot say. But I do know at 41 years old, he did marry a 19-year-old girl.
And are we talking about your great-grandfather now?
My great-grandfather.
So that was his second marriage to Maria Bradshaw.
Yes, right. She was 19 and he was 41 or 2 or 3, whatever. Anyway, what they did when they got to British Columbia is basically still carried on their self-employment entrepreneurship, and they literally rented a ranch from a man in Williams Lake by the name of Pinchbeck. And they rented that ranch, and they actually grew wheat on what was Pinchbeck Farm, which is now the Stampede grounds. And they also, Hope migrated to the state around more the 150 area, and he was the telegraph operator at the 150 for many years.
150-mile house.
150-mile house, yeah. And then they gradually migrated to Horsefly. And by about 1896, 7, 8 or so, they were living in Horsefly. And they had general stores, general merchants, right? And I think for a while, all of them took a stab at being the postmaster. And J.P., Joseph Phillip, my great-grandfather, was actually the Justice of the Peace in Williams Lake.
Double J.P.
Yeah, J.P., yeah. So that kind of covers what they did. And then they went into ranching. They preempted 2 very lovely pieces of valley land up the Horsefly River in 1899. And they ended up parting with the Woodjam Ranch, and they moved up to the more likable ranch to their taste, was called the Martin Creek Ranch. And then later on, I'm not sure what year, they actually sold the Woodjam Ranch. And they stayed on, and I was raised on the Martin Creek Ranch, up Black Creek.
Before we do the Martin Creek, so the Woodjam was the original Patenaude Ranch?
Well, it was, yes, I think they preempted the Woodjam first, and then they preempted secondly. They owned both at one time, and then they decided to sell the Woodjam, and I'm not sure what year that would have been. I'm guessing maybe around the 1910, because that was when my grandmother moved into Horsefly to become the first public school teacher in Horsefly,
What was her name?
Annie Moore. Annie Moore. And she was told when she was applying for the job in Vancouver that she should get to know a young rancher in Horsefly by the name of Albert Joseph Patenaude. And that's my grandmother and grandfather.
FYI, the museum has your grandmother's eyeglasses.
Yes.
Yeah, they're lovely.
We all want them. They need to stay in the museum.
They
We
will
all
be
want
there.
them. Yeah.
Wood jam. Does that have a story behind it, the name?
Yes, it actually does. The reason why it's called the wood jam is when they preempted that land. Of course, back in those days, there wasn't even a real road up Black Creek. It was more of a trail. And actually, first time my grandfather ever ventured up the valley, he went up by river in a canoe. And they portages around what they call the rapids. So at the Wood Jam, which is now still called the Wood Jam Ranch, there was a huge log jam. And it was like a couple of acres of logs. And they actually had a road with boards built across the log jam. And it never washed out for years and years and years. And so it's still the Wood Jam Ranch. And it says right on the sign, as you go by now, the Wood Jam Ranch since 1899.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's also a for sale sign now.
Yeah, for $11.2 million.
Wow. So what are their chances?
I think very slim
Yeah?
myself. They kind of fancy it to be a trophy ranch is what they call it. But my God, not many people have money to buy a trophy, you know what I mean, of $11 million. So it's anybody's guess what that ranch might sell for. But,
All right.
yeah. If I had the money, I think I would buy it back.
But you've got a lovely land
I
around
just say
you.
that facetiously because I know I never have the money to go beyond what I already got, and I don't really need to.
So your dad was?
Harold Patenaude, my grandfather's third child.
All right.
The eldest was Ida, who married a Zernhelt, and the next eldest was Albert, who died about 15 years ago at 90-some years old.
This is
and
Albert.
The next oldest was my dad.
Okay. And that's Arthur.
No, that's
No,
Harold.
sorry.
Harold.
Harold, my mistake.
Arthur is my brother.
Arthur Moore.
Arthur?
Moore.
Arthur.
Oh,
Moore.
he died. He was only 1 year old when he died.
Yes.
So he was born just before Harold.
But he wouldn't
He was-
have been a Moor.
No, but that was his second name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
he was born the year before Harold, but died
Yes,
just
there
before.
there would have been a child born between.
There you go.
them.
There you go. So and this is Harold Tilson.
Harold Tilson Patenaude. Yeah.
I've never seen Tilson before. Is there a story behind that name?
I don't.
You don't know?
I don't even pretend to know it.
No.
But the name was passed on to my oldest brother, who also goes by Harold Tilson Patenaude. Yeah.
And your mother was Mary Johnson.
Mary Johnson.
And what were they like as parents?
They were angels. They were as close to being human angels for parents any person could ever wish to have.
That you can't say much more than that.
It's amazing.
And
I hear all kinds of horror stories about these boys that were beat by their parents and their dad slapped them around every time they did something. My dad cuffed my ear once in my life because I kicked my older brother in the shins, and I deserved it. Never did he ever whip me or anything.
so do angel parents make solely angel children?
No, they more like devilish. I think it works the opposite.
What kind of a childhood did you experience?
I literally lived a life of magic all my life. I never once wanted to be anywhere but where I was at home. It was amazing. I just loved it. And even to this day, at just about 72 years old, I still dream of my childhood on the ranch. Wake up in the morning and I think, wasn't that neat? Now that I've been here for twice as long as I lived on that ranch, even more, I am actually starting to dream a bit about here now in my dreams, but I cannot believe how much of my childhood I still dream about. And of course your dreams make up stories as well, right? Like flying down the valley on a mat, you know what I mean? So I had a great childhood, just marvelous.
And when did music start playing a role in your life?
The music was in my ears before I was born. Before I was born, my dad, my mom, my grandmother, my aunt, they always had a big sing-song at everybody's birthday, everybody's New Year's, Easter, it was a sing-song. It was a sing-song. Everybody sang, right? And that's what I grew up with. My dad played the fiddle a bit. He fiddled around on the guitar a bit, and he was a drummer and a saxophone player as he grew up in a band. So, and my grandmother, my dad's mother, was a maestro on the piano, and she taught every one of the kids piano but me. I never took a piano lesson in my life.
By choice?
No, it was because I really didn't have any interest in playing the piano. At a very young age, I found myself a guitar, 12 years old, and the guitar has never left me. No. I bought my first guitar. That guitar lasted me until I was 19. At 19, I bought my first guitar, and I still have it in my collection.
And you've been performing for a long time.
Yeah, I started performing pretty well about 20 years old. I moved to Vancouver. I found a girlfriend that loved music, and we loved each other, and we found a drummer, and for the next 3 years in Vancouver, we played at every wedding and every Lower Mainland Legion club, sportsman club you can name. And when I moved back to Williams Lake 3 years later, I didn't move that band, but I came back, and the first thing I did was form a band in Williams Lake.
In Vancouver, did your band have a name?
We were called Just Us.
Just Us.
Just Us.
And what about in Williams Lake?
We were called Patenaude, Predator, and Jackson.
Patenaude, Predator, and Jackson.
Yeah.
Well, explain that one.
Yeah. Well, the drummer, his name was Mike Jackson. He's still in Williams Lake. He's a hell of a good friend. He said, you know, I think we should call it, we were thinking about band names. He said, we should call ourselves the Magic Ship. And I said, no. I said, I kind of like the way people are naming themselves after like Emerson, Lake and Palmer and all this, and Stills, Nashville, and Nash and Young. I said, I like Patenaude, Predator, and Jackson. And that's what we were.
So someone actually had Predator as a last name?
His name was Wes Predator, and he died in a helicopter crash with the pilot and another Fish and Wildlife guy in about 1975. Shortly after we moved here, actually. So Wes Predator is no longer part of the band.
So at some point you started creating a family.
I did. I met up with an old school chum at the old, what was called the Tasty Freeze for breakfast, and I met an old friend named Earl. And he was with his newly found wife named Sue. And Sue took a kind of a liking to me, and she said, I want you to meet my friend Emily. And she went to the Chilcote, and she told Emily that she met a guy named Geoff Patenaude and that we should meet. About 6 months later, I walked into the most famous pub that Williams Lake has ever had, called the Chilcote Inn, and it could house about 300 drinkers. And I walked into the room, and there by the closest table to the door was this cute little blonde sitting with a friend named John, another guy named Glenn. And I sat down and said, hi John, how are you doing? And John said, hi Geoff, how are you doing? And Emily turned around, is this Geoff Patenaude? And I shook hands, with Emily, and we chatted for 5 minutes, and I was so overwhelmed, I couldn't stand it. I said, well, folks, I gotta go. And I walked out of there and I wiped my brow and I thought, holy smokes. The next weekend I went back to the bar with high hopes. Of course she was playing pool, and I walked in and she looked up and she said, you wanna go dancing? And we ended up with 4 children, and now we have 5.5 grandchildren.
Wow.
It was like the storybook of my life, right? Amazing. I don't know how many men get to meet what should be the love of their life, right? Really.
Tell me about the order of the children now.
Ferris is number 1. Do you want any dates or anything like that?
Whatever you want to tell.
1979. Ciel, number 2. Ciel, pretty nice name, eh?
Beautiful.
Ciel Grove Patenaude.
Very nice.
She was born in 1983, I believe. No, 81, sorry. Next one would be Marin Dorothy Patenaude, born in 1983. And then there was a little bit of a lull. And then there was all of a sudden, there was an oops. And the oops turned out to be our boy.
And what's his name?
His name is Cole Arthur David Patenaude.
Good stuff. Now, your love at that point, Emily Story, she was very musically oriented as well.
Oh, totally. But she's much more musical than I am. I was just more of a wannabe musician. I never really had a good sense of timing. My ears were bad for notes, but I loved doing it, and I didn't care how bad I sounded. But if Emily wanted to, she didn't want to perform in public, but if she had wanted to, she could have been doing like Ferris. She could have become famous being a musician, because she was so damn good. She had almost, I think, a perfect pitch ear. She had also 10 years of Toronto Conservatory piano behind her that taught these kids, so with the help of piano lessons, right? So she was a fantastic pianist. I would come home for work, and every day she'd be playing something on the piano, and I'd just have to stop and listen.
I also understand that beyond Patenaude, Predator, and Jackson, you were, for a while, a one-man band.
Yeah, and that came about quite by accident. We had moved here, and I had a neighbor, so a couple of years after I moved here, a neighbor bought the place, and we became friends, and he played bass. And then I knew another guy that wanted to play drums, so I said, I got a New Year's gig. Do you guys want to play? A week before the New Year's gig showed up, I get a call from both of them, we can't play, we can't make it. I said, the heck with you guys. I went to town and bought myself a drum and a hi-hat, and for the next week I pounded like this, and I went and played that New Year's gig by myself, made $200 and some, and I played for 5 solid years as a one-man band. And I loved it. You're free. You're free to invite up onto the stage all the goons that want to come and play with you. Some people with upright tub basses, and some guy'd come up and pretend to play guitar. Oh, I had so much fun. So much fun. I played at 6 New Year's dances. All by myself.
Good stuff.
And Halloween parties and weddings and you name it. Some of them I shouldn't have done, but I did it anyway. Then finally, I just said, this is too lonesome, and I stopped. And then along came the kids, and that was the best music that I ever enjoyed in my life. And they would steal the show every time. And I would love it. I just love it.
So tell me what you did in those performances.
With
like
the kids?
how did that come about?
Well, it actually came about quite like I told you about playing at Expo 86 with the band. And the little girls are up front. We had yet to play in public.
Which band are we talking about now?
The band that I went to, we were called Geoff Patenaude and the Goose Lake Raiders. And that's what we played at the Expo 86. And so when I invited the 3 girls up, but Ferris refused to come up. the two girls came up and they just loved, and the audience just ate it up. They just loved it. So the next year, I had played that year at the first Lac-La-Hache Country Music Festival as a solo, and also played with Chris Elwick as another night, the next night, as a duo. And then we went to Expo 86 the next year. So the next year, the kids and I had been playing some music together because it felt so good at Expo to do it. I got a call back to go, would you come with your friend Chris and play again at the Lac-La-Hache Country Music Festival? And I said, I will under one condition. Can I bring my children to play with me? Absolutely. 7 years later, the Lac-La-Hache Country Music Festival folded, and we never played again. But 7 years in a row we played, and it was fantastic. Everybody loved it. All the aunts and the uncles would show up, the cousins to come, and they were great to have along. You know, lots of pictures of the Lac-La-Hache Country Music Festival.
So while you were having all this fun, what brought in the money?
Well, I'm being a self-proclaimed independent. You know, I own my own logging company and or equipment. At times, I had a 5-man crew, and I had a logging contract for several years. And I took on big jobs like land clearing jobs. So I was basically a contractor. And so I wasn't loaded with money, but I had more money than the average man, and in those days. And I could afford to take time off, and I usually only worked 6 months a year. And the rest of the time I cleared and developed my piece of land, which is now a very lovely piece of land producing hay, right? And it was just raw land when I bought it, and I've developed the whole thing all by myself. So, and that takes time and money.
Now this house that we're in, you've expanded this building.
Yeah, we moved, when we bought the piece of land, there was a little cabin. I think Ferris told you that it burnt down.
Tell me about that.
The first little cabin burnt down, and it was right where we walked in there, right there. So that year I went logging in Likely, and I made enough money to come back, and I built that first part over there in 1976. And Emily went to work, and I stayed at home. And in 6 weeks and $1,500 later, we moved into our new home. And over the years, we added an addition. Mostly every time we had a child, we added an addition. And then came 83. I had a pretty good year logging, and I actually wanted to go to Hawaii and buy a piece of land in Hawaii. So we had an alternative place to go. And my wife looked at me and she said, my idea would be to put a big addition on the house and forget about Hawaii. And we got along pretty good about things like that. I said, okay, you look after it, I'll pay for it. And she did. She had all this done. She hired the guys. I bought all the equipment. And about 4 years later, it was a complete place. And I've never really looked back. I don't want to go to Hawaii. I like it here.
With this expanded house, is there enough room in it for all your collections?
Well, no, there's not, because the collections go like for acres. There's no kidding. There's collections of heavy equipment. There's collections of, not really that I collect old used pickups, but there's no more than probably 10 used pickups out there. And there's about 9, it goes on. I'm such a junkie, it's amazing. I can't refuse something. If somebody says, do you want that old thing? Yeah, I do. So.
Tell me a good side of being a junk lover.
You never really have to go to town very often to get a part. You can go to your junk and find a part. And that's the beauty of it, living away out here an hour from town, right? And so I'm really lucky. I got parts that would do me 2 lifetimes.
And how do your collections go with your grandchildren?
They love them. They're slowly walking away with them.
Let's go back a few years again. So we're going back to when Horsefly was Harper's Camp. You've got a connection with Harper's Camp that you found.
Well, the only real collection that I would have would be a piece of roofing, and I'll go get it.
Okay. So tell me about that piece of tin.
My neighbor asked me to take my big machine down and tear down an old, what was a hay shed, and it had tin on the roof. And I'm torn it down, I'm taking the tin off because I said, well, I'll take the tin home and use it. And one of the pieces of tin had one side down to the dark. All those years, it was probably built way back in the 60s, I would say. And one of the pieces of tin, where they got the piece of tin probably was reused because the shed wasn't as old as the piece of tin was. It said printed in very black ink or paint, J.P. Patenaude, Harper's Camp, BC.
It was meant to be in your hands.
Yeah, so I cut this piece of tin out, and that's what I sent you as a picture. And I still have it around somewhere.
It's a piece of history.
Yeah.
A story about AJ.
Albert Joseph.
Yeah, owning a 303 Ross rifle. So what happened?
He was a 303 Ross rifle were a very poor excuse for, I think it was one of Canada's attempts at making an army rifle. And they had a terrible problem with, you could actually put the bolt in and it wouldn't lock. For some odd reason, I don't really know. I've never seen one, in all honesty. And he went to shoot a coyote, and the bolt wasn't locked the way it could possibly happen. And the bolt came right back when he shot the coyote and took his right cheek right off. So when he died, he had a hole in his cheek right here. Took this whole cheek right off his face. 303 Ross.
Wow. Now, he was involved with the ranch for several years.
Oh, he was the man that preempted the land.
Right.
Basically. He did that on his own without his father.
But then he left the ranch.
No, he never did leave the ranch. When he left the ranch, he left the planet.
Oh.
He died in 1952 when I was 5 years old. And I visited him with my dad in the old Williams Lake Hospital. So I remember him on his deathbed, and I never saw him again.
Is there another AJ then who would have left the ranch between 52 and 68?
Well, there was an Albert Joseph Jr.
Junior. Yeah.
Who left the ranch probably, he would have been born in 1914, I believe. My dad was born in 16, so 1914. And Albert Joseph Patenaude Jr. left the ranch before he was 20 years old. And he never did return. He returned for a visit over the years to visit his mother, but I don't remember him ever coming back to the ranch after Mother died in 1965. So that Albert Joseph, that was the eldest boy, right, left the ranch, never to come back. He moved to Merritt and was chief of electricians at the copper mine in Highland Valley. Yeah.
And the ranch was sold out of the family around that time, right?
No, the ranch was sold out of the family in 1968.
Okay.
And it was, to be honest with you, I had angelic parents. And my mother and her only brother got along famously. But my dad, I'm sorry to say, could not get along with his brothers. They just had no love for each other whatsoever. They were always arguing and fighting, and I'm right, you're wrong, you know what I mean, how brotherly it can be. And so they tried to do business together on the ranch. And finally, in about 1944, my dad left the ranch. When I was born, my dad wasn't living on the ranch. He was living in Kamloops country on his own, sawmilling. And then when I was 5 years old in 52, Dad and his brothers decided that maybe they should try and get along, and they got the first timber quota issued in the Horsefly area. And they couldn't get along, and they squandered the whole thing. Just amazing. And so the fact that they couldn't get along left kind of bad blood in them all, and the other four voted against my dad to sell the ranch. I took a note from the new buyers. I took it to my dad. My dad opened it up, and my dad always had a habit of grunting before he said something. And he opened the letter up and he said, "We got to be off by September the 30th. I said, "What?" "They've sold the ranch." I was heartbroken. At 20 years old, I had decided to stay on the ranch and stay ranching. I was actually going to go into sheep, was my idea. And it literally devastated me when that ranch was sold. And it devastated the whole family. They never talked to each other for the next almost 20 years, when my ex-wife decided that it was time the Patenaudes should regroup. And she organized a family reunion in 1985. And there's some really good pictures up there. All the brothers came, all the nephews came, all the cousins came. From the 140 relatives showed up. These kids were just, Ferris was, she would have been 6 years old when I was taken on. So.
And that mended things somewhat?
Yeah, it brought the family a little bit better together. My dad had not spoken to his sister in all those years. And she showed up, and they actually spoke together. My Uncle Wilford showed up, and Uncle Philip, and Albert. Everybody showed up. It was amazing. It was like nothing ever happened. Yeah.
And you said you would have considered you were considering sheep ranching. I understand you love cows.
I did not like cows. No. When I was a child, I did not like cows, and I developed this thing about them. You're either trying to keep them in, or keep them out, or keep them alive, or butcher them. One of the two, and I just couldn't stand the whole thing. And I thought, I'm going to try sheep. And it probably would have been worse.
So you never carried through as a rancher then?
No.
Because the ranch was gone.
When I bought this place with my ex-wife, Emily, I said, we will never own a cow, a sheep, or a horse. I'm just going to make a hay ranch. And in all honesty, I have never owned an animal other than a dog, a turtle, a goldfish, and a cat.
Now let's go into another direction. Your grandmother, Annie Moore. Can you tell me a bit more about her?
She was quite an amazingly, very self-assertive woman, very accomplished woman. She became a good enough piano player, and so that she made a good portion of her living teaching piano. She moved to Canada. She was born in Minnesota to pure Irish ancestors. And then they moved, for some reason or other, whether or not they all moved to Canada, I do not know. But I know that at least two sisters moved to Canada. And my grandmother became the first school teacher on Bowen Island, Dog Creek, Likely, Horsefly, and Black Creek. First public school teacher. So she was a going concern. And she taught all of her kids piano. She taught all of my siblings, except for me, piano. And she was a businesswoman. She looked after the money. When they bought something on the ranch, she wrote the check out. In 1947, the year I was born, they bought a Army bulldozer, a 1944 HD-10 bulldozer, and she wrote the check out for $5,000 to buy it. Yeah. And I grew up with that cat. Right? That's why I love bulldozers. There was a bulldozer under that. So.
She was a petite woman, was she not? She was a petite woman.
She was probably not as tall as my ex-wife. I think she was 5'1". Yeah. But you know, one thing neat about her, she loved to tell this story. She was such a proud Irish person that she would sit down with her hands on her knees and she'd say, you know, if somebody was to ask me what I'd be if I wasn't Irish, she'd say, I'd have to be ashamed of it.
She sounds pretty feisty.
Yeah.
Now, you have a younger sister, Helen,
I do.
and she had a car accident, right?
No, that was Sherry.
My
I
mistake.
have 3 younger sisters.
Okay,
Helen is the eldest.
okay.
Then I have Maureen. And then I have Sherry, who at 14 years old was nearly killed in a car accident.
And that was Maureen?
No, that was Sherry.
Sharon.
Sherry.
And how did that recuperation, what was it? Was it a car accident?
Yeah, I was right at the main street light in Williams Lake. She was riding with her boyfriend. And she lost all her front teeth. Her whole jaw was almost ripped right off her face. And to this day, it's amazing. She's 60-some years old, and you can hardly tell at all. No. You can see she's had teeth replaced, but that's it. So.
There was one mortal accident in the family, right? With Dennis?
Dennis?
Dennis Patenaude, killed by a tractor.
Oh, that's right, that.
That's the
That's
other.
one of Roger's brothers.
Right.
And I'm not sure where he was. He must have been probably the youngest, because he was 11 years old when he was killed. So there would have been 4 boys. Rusty is the oldest, and then there was Larry, and then Roger, and then Dennis. And Dennis was killed. And then Larry died at 54, 55 of cancer. Probably 12 years ago, 14 years ago, something like that.
Now, what about some of the Patenaudes serving in the military? Did that occur?
No. And the reason why is they were all busy ranching. And every one of them were commissioned by the government. My dad grew 100 acres of turnips, commissioned by the government, and 100 acres of peas. So they were really into producing for the government. Right?
So their role as farmers and ranchers was considered critical.
Absolutely, and they were not constricted or conscripted. Right?
Your dad, Harold, he raised pigs as well.
He raised pigs, yeah, he did. Yeah. He raised many pigs, and one of the funniest stories I've ever heard in my life was he used to put his peas in the barrel, a couple big old wooden barrels. And one time a barrel of peas got left behind for some reason or other, and then the rain filled the barrel up, and the peas all fermented. And the pigs came along and dumped that barrel over, and they smelled that fermented peas, and 100 pigs got drunk before that. He said it was one of the most hilarious things, if not ever, he'd ever seen.
Can you still sell drunken meat?
Well, I think it would make it tender.
Now, other than riding bulldozers, you've had your share of experience with all sorts of vehicles.
Yes. Bulldozers are my probably heavy equipment is my way of making a living, and I am surprised. In a way, I'm lucky. I'm happy that I'm alive because I've been so close, so many times. It is amazing. I've scraped by so. It's such a dangerous occupation. It's amazing.
What about your motorcycles?
Motorcycles, I have always been a little bit more careful. I've never sped on motorcycles. I've never been one to want to jump into the air like Evel Knievel. I tried it a little bit as a young fella, and I thought, no, this is too dangerous to be careless. And I've never had a motorcycle accident.
Did your kids have motorcycles? Did your kids have motorcycles?
Not as Cole did, my son, but the girls weren't interested in them. Cole, I bought Cole a little mini bike when he was about 7 years old, 7 or 8.
And you're a pilot as well.
A who?
You're a pilot.
A pet?
Pilot.
Oh,
Wait.
a pilot. Sorry,
Pilot, sorry, no problem.
Right? Pilot. Yes, I went up north years ago when Lake Williston was being flooded. That Lake Williston, are you familiar with? It now produces the water at Hudson Hope Dam. And Lake Williston was mistakenly flooded 20 feet deeper than it should have been a year early. And so they hired a whole bunch of fallers, and men from all over the country flocked to Lake Williston, and we would fly in, land on the ice, and get out of the plane, buy yourself your first power saw, in my case at 19 years old, when I got there. And then we were taken across the lake, huge lake by then, huge lake, but it was all the timber was in 20 feet of water. And we had to fall trees and limb all the trees, and the hopes were the next spring they would float all this timber out. It worked to a degree, but more of it got wasted than was salvaged. So in the meantime, flying in to go to work, I took a fancy to flying. I thought this would be pretty neat. So when I came out, when I was done for the winter work, the first thing my older brother and I did was go to the Williams Lake Airport, and we enrolled in a $5 introductory course into whether we wanted to be flyers or not.
$5?
$5. So, needless to say, we both loved flying, and in 6 weeks, we were both licensed pilots. I'm still actually a licensed pilot, but I don't keep the pilot medical up. I keep my class 1 truck driving up. But I lost my desire to fly because I got tired of it. It just, you go up and you go buzz, 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 and it's more boring than motorcycling, right? Motorcycling is never boring. Snowmobiling, boating is way more exciting than flying. But I'm glad I did it. Totally glad I did it.
So could you have, when you were at I guess the lake was frozen when you were there, when you were doing the logging, but is that a lake you could have used your scuba diving in?
Well, I tell you, one of the interesting things happened in the spring, near the spring. Rather than come up, the lake drained 4 feet. And the ice on the trees was 4 feet thick. And it broke off in the shape of a great big cone. And every tree you could walk up, and the WCB came along and kicked us home, go home. Because the whole lake dropped down 4 feet. You walk up to the tree, and it had 4 feet of ice on it, but you could look down into 16 feet of water. And there was the beautiful part of that tree down in the lake, and they never retrieved it. So that was the end of that job. But I got to do January, February, and March before that lake dropped. So it was one of the most memorable things I ever did in my life.
Your scuba diving was just for enjoyment then?
Scuba diving I took up in Vancouver when I moved to Vancouver years later and became an office machine mechanic after a technical school course in Victoria. I worked in Vancouver for the next 3 years as a job. And a friend took scuba diving, and he said, you should come. I did. And I loved it, but the same thing. It wears off. After a while, scuba diving just wore off. I never wanted to be a Jacques Cartier or Jacques Cousteau.
Cousteau, yeah.
So, but I'm glad I did it. I did scuba diving. It was wonderful.
So what's keeping you busy these days?
Basically, old age. You get half as much done in twice as much time as you did when you were 50 as you do when you're 70. But I'm just kidding. I keep my 160 acres, I like to think of it as my piece of artwork. I don't like one piece of garbage on it. I don't, my yard is a cluster of mess, but it's made that way. It's utilizable. But out on my farm, I love it to look like Stanley Park, and it does. Yeah. So this is a big job. Just maintaining and keeping 160 acres of land is basically a full-time job. Okay?
Are you still taking contracts?
Yes, I do. I still actively go out and I build roads for people. I got an excavator. I dig ditches. I put in wells. I do anything an excavator, a loader, a bulldozer, or a dump truck will do. I snowplow all winter with various equipment, and so I'm never one to sit around. No.
So a music festival calls you. Do you go?
I do, but I really don't get called anymore. The kids have taken over the whole show, you might say. But I did get to play this year at Horsefly because it was a gig that Ferris and her husband they had a 3-hour window to put a variety show on, and I was part of the variety, and it was wonderful. It was just great. They had everybody from a cowboy poet up there. The oldest guy in Horsefly got up there and told a story about somebody, old Ernie Gruce, and everybody got up there. So my friend Bernadette, she told James, do you realize what happened?
No.
She told James that she was really ticked off because she didn't get asked to play at the festival. So I saw her in Horsefly, and I said, you're playing. You're coming tomorrow night to play because you're playing with Chris and I on stage, but I'll have to buy a ticket. She said, no, I said, no, you don't. You'll be bought in. So about 2 minutes later, Maren came along. I said, Maren, I just got Bernadette up on stage. She said, where did you find her? I phoned her a while ago and she said she wouldn't be in town. I thought, holy smokes, Bernadette. Anyway, she got up on stage and she was good. She's a good musician.
And you performed with all your kids?
Yeah, all the kids. First time in 30 years, I think, that we'd actually done a gig up on stage.
And what did you play?
Well, basically we sang most of my own songs that the kids learned as kids. I think, did we do a cover song? No, we didn't do any cover song. We usually did, when we played at the Lancashire, we would do a cover song or two, and the kids would always do their thing, right? Which they had this beautiful harmony worked out, and they did Gordon Lightfoot songs, or it was their thing, right? So I think the autographs were after the kids.
Any regrets?
I don't have a regret in my life. No, I really don't. Because if I did, it would mean I didn't learn anything from what happened, right? No, you can't regret it. You just got to learn from that scenario, right? So that's about all I could say is I've learned quite a bit from scenarios that might have gone wrong, or so to speak, or didn't go the way they could have gone. But no, I don't regret. I don't regret.
And who might be your heroes in your family?
The hero in my family?
Heroes, yeah?
You know, actually, I really, really did admire my dad. I really admired a man who could raise 7 children. I raised 4, and it's a big job. And he raised 7 kids, and never one of us starved. Never one of us did without shoes. Never one of us did it without a bicycle, right? But we were also taught, hey, you want something? Go get it. Go work for it. Save for it. collect beer bottles. He taught us how to collect beer bottles. Go be the janitor at the school. We each made enough money being a janitor at the school over the course of a year. We bought ourselves a brand new bicycle in the spring from Sears. That was pretty neat, right? Because Dad taught us, go do something, you know? Go get a job, you know? And go mow some hay.
So is there something that we haven't touched upon yet that you would like to bring up before we wrap up?
No, we've touched on all the good things. No, there's so much, and I love talking, and there's so much that goes on, but you know as well as I do, when you're in a situation, your mind only, you tweak me to think about something. If you ask a question, right? It's hard to remember all, and it's hard to really know what you should bring along. I don't want to denigrate anybody, you know. So.
Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been my pleasure to meet you and to experience through your stories your whole lifetime. It's just great. Good luck with your pursuing career. Right? Be careful and enjoy your musical family.
One, I may regret a minor bit that I didn't have my new hearing aids.
Such is life.
But they're coming, so.
We've managed it, right? We've managed. Thank you again, Geoff.
Welcome, boys.